103 wins, 7 world titles, 15 years of winning, all of that stopped in 2022. New technical regulations were implemented with a focus on utilising ground effect to generate downforce. This had been in the Formula 1 wilderness for 40 years as it had been banned in 1982, and so, of course, it was new for everyone involved in the modern cars. And so, experiments were taken, with Mercedes' new car the most radical of them all. It was the only car that had a concept dubbed Zero Pods, which opened up a lot of floor, causing a lot of suck to come from underneath the floors, so much that Mercedes had difficulty controlling the aerodynamics underneath the car. The W13 was officially revealed with the two drivers, Lewis Hamilton and new budding teammate George Russell, completing an inaugural shakedown before the initial tests in late February and early March. During the testing days, it became apparent that the car was suffering from handling and balance problems, partly due to excessive porpoising. Porpoising, one of the biggest issues with ground effect, essentially a rocking motion like a porpoise diving in and out of the sea, which causes an extremely unpleasant ride and, according to George Russell, safety issues and chest pain. The issues they struggled with caused Hamilton to write off their chances of winning the first race of the season, and although they topped the third session of testing, there was a surprising lack of hope from the Mercedes outfit, who was so used to winning after 8 constructors and 7 drivers' titles. Everyone else, though, took their word with a pinch of salt, considering the sandbagging and downplaying they had done over the previous 8 years, expecting them to turn up at Bahrain and blow everyone away with their sudden pace like they had all those years prior. Alarm bells that Mercedes were actually telling the truth started to ring in Q1 in Bahrain, where both Mercedes would be in the mid-pack, out-qualified by the likes of Kevin Magnussen's Haas and Valtteri Bottas' Alfa Romeo, and although Hamilton would qualify 5th in the end, he looked like nowhere near the top 4, with Russell 9th. It really looked like a changing of the guard. Problems for the two Red Bulls and well-timed safety cars helped Mercedes up to a 3rd and a 4th, but it wasn't a commanding position by any stretch of the imagination. Jeddah was the host of Hamilton's last win in 2021 just 3 races ago, and so surely he will be able to put up a strong performance, especially considering the porpoising seemed to be the worst at the end of high-speed straights, and Saudi Arabia was characterised by its 27 corners. Mercedes were expected to be at least a little closer to the top 2 teams. Q1 would start and Hamilton would set a bank of lap on mediums, putting him last of the completed runs before Nicholas Latifi hit the wall and brought out a red flag. Yuki Tsunoda would also have a fuel issue, ruling him out of qualifying and narrowing the amount of drivers out of Q1 down to just 4. His second run would take him only up to 13th, 1.6 seconds off the provisional poleman Carlos Sainz. And his third one, which had become a crucial moment, saw him fail to improve and drop to 16th. He managed to squeeze one more lap in and improved to set a 1:30.3 and placing him in just 15th above the drop zone. However, Lance Stroll would be next across the line and would have a 10th off of that to scrape out of Q1 and knock Lewis out at the first hurdle for the first time in 5 years, when he was only a 3-time world champion. He would end up in the points, or in the point, 1 minute and 14 seconds behind race winner Max Verstappen in 10th. He claimed post-race that the car was undrivable. 4th place in Australia wasn't too bad, but more issues came with the car as he struggled to catch his teammate due to overheating. The next race, Hamilton and Mercedes were back in the deep end compared to where they wanted to be. Both would be out in Q2, and Hamilton would face the ultimate shame as he would be lapped by his championship rival from just the year prior, Max Verstappen, and he would get stuck behind the junior Red Bull team in Nera, which would made for overtaking. It would be a representative race of the early segment of the 2022 season for Mercedes, as they were really struggling in pretty much all aspects relative to where they wanted to be and arguably should be. I mean, they had more leeway to develop for 2022 due to the dominance of the years prior, even though they couldn't develop on it during 2021, but would try to go too radical and fall behind. The new systems in place as well wouldn't help them at all. The sliding scale system had been introduced in 2021 to regulate aerodynamic testing. Under the system, the least successful teams in the previous year's Constructors' Championship will be given more time for aerodynamic testing, and therefore the most successful teams will be given significantly less. In Mercedes' case, they had won the title the year prior and so would have less time than anyone to completely overhaul their car. With less money than they ever had before due to the budget cap, they had royally screwed themselves. The Azerbaijan Grand Prix was the last race before Mercedes' first planned upgrades of the season, and ironically it was one of their best results, as once again they would pick up a 3-4 with George holding that podium position. Azerbaijan, in contrast to Saudi Arabia, did have long straights, and the cars would seem to be bouncing, even causing Hamilton to struggle to get out of his car at the end of the race. They were throwing everything with the drivers for not the results they were hoping for. The upgrades could barely be better timed. They would cause a run of podiums for both drivers as Ferrari struggled to keep up with Red Bull and made mistakes in the chase. Their biggest strength was the reliability and consistency of both the vehicles, which, although lacking the outright pace to take victories, kept them in the right place and the right time to do so, except they didn't. The Red Bull was just too dominant for anyone that year, especially from France onwards, where they took 10 out of a possible 11 victories. That 11th, though, was big news for Mercedes and could be seen as a big step forward. As the team stretched towards the end of the season, Mercedes' continued improvement came to fruition with 2 second places in the USA and Mexico for Lewis. The race in Brazil was the penultimate of the season. Showers began at the end of Q2 with 9 of the 10 drivers starting on the dry tyres. Sergio Perez and Charles Leclerc failed to set representative lap times before Russell span at turn 4 and the rain worsened, rendering another run pointless and handing pole to the Haas of Magnussen. Russell would start 3rd and Hamilton 8th. It was a sprint weekend, and as should be the case now, the sprint results would decide the grid positions for the race on Sunday, meaning there was more at stake. Only 2 drivers, Verstappen and Nicholas Latifi, would start on the medium tyres while everyone else was on the softs, but despite this, he seemed to struggle more with tyre degradation than the rest of the field. His problems would compound with him running over debris caused by a collision between the 2 Alpines, meaning he lost further pace, being passed by George Russell for the lead of the race and then Carlos Sainz 3 laps later. As Sainz passed, he and Verstappen would make contact, and Verstappen would suffer front wing damage. He would be passed by Hamilton for 3rd in the end, which saw both Mercedes drivers on the front row for the Sunday as Sainz took a 5-place grid penalty for engine components. On lap 7 of the Grand Prix, Verstappen would go to pass Hamilton going into turn 2 and they would make contact, dropping them down to the lower points positions. Luckily, Hamilton didn't sustain damage, but Verstappen did, and so he would pit, putting him out of contention for the race. The Mercedes cars had incredible pace compared to where they were previously. Russell would build a big gap to the field in the lead, and Hamilton would come up to 4th after the first round of pit stops and 3rd ahead of Perez afterwards. Lando Norris retired on lap 53 with a gearbox failure, creating a safety car and giving Carlos Sainz the opportunity to pit again, but he was unable to catch either Mercedes and the team would let them fight it out, with Russell having the pace to stay ahead and win with Lewis in 2nd. It was the worst year for Lewis's career, just objectively. 6th was the worst position in the championship he'd ever finished, mainly due to setup experiments which saw him much faster than Russell on some weekends and much slower on others. It was his first winless season ever in his 16th season in Formula 1, and his chase for the 8th seemed as though it was slipping away. The Zero Pods design was a struggle throughout the 2022 season, but they chose to continue with it throughout 2023. Toto Wolff claimed, however, that the W14 would have different DNA, and the car certainly looked different. It was a throwback to their success that they had with it in 2020 and 2021, definitely not to save weight, and the hopes were on coming back to victories in the championship fight. The opening races of the season seemed to be a big step back. They were the 4th fastest team now behind Aston Martin, even though Lance Stroll's lack of pace would help them. Still, it was embarrassing for Mercedes. I mean, Aston Martin were a customer team, and somehow they were still able to understand the engine more than them. The Australian Grand Prix was the 3rd round of the season, and it was a track that seemed to suit the Mercedes as it, alongside Aston Martin, struggled down straights. This was confirmed when they qualified 2nd and 3rd, and there was a possibility they could take a race win. Verstappen suffered wheel spin at the start, which saw both Mercedes take a 1-2 lead of the Grand Prix when the safety car came out. A second safety car came out on lap 7 and Russell dove into the pits for hard compound tyres, giving Hamilton the lead, but then a red flag came out which screwed over Russell as well as the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz, who also came in. Hamilton would be passed for the lead at the restart and Russell would go up to 4th before lap 18 where his car caught fire and he was forced to retire from the Grand Prix, meaning that Hamilton had to fight on by himself. Verstappen would break away ahead of Hamilton, but at least he would take 2nd until lap 55 and 58. Kevin Magnussen would hit the wall at turn 2, causing his tyre to detach and calling out the 2nd red flag of the race. The restart was crazy. Sainz pushed Fernando Alonso into a spin. The 2 Alpines came together. Nick De Vries, Logan Sargent and Stroll would find themselves in the gravel and the race was red flagged for the 3rd time. The Marshals restarted the race on the final lap in order of the previous start and Verstappen won ahead of Hamilton. Another unlucky near miss. Between this and the next Grand Prix, Technical Director Mike Elliott and Chief Technical Officer James Allison would swap roles. Upgrades would be brought to the Monaco Grand Prix after struggling to keep up with the frontrunners, with the biggest being the re-addition of side pods. Mercedes' new car is here and it looks like we finally have side pods. The following weekend at Spain, the first place where they would really matter, Hamilton would top Q1 and qualify 5th while Russell would qualify in 12th. However, they turned it round in the race, which is something they wouldn't have been able to do until the upgrades, and gained a double podium. It wouldn't be the last podium Russell would get for the rest of the season, but Hamilton did maintain the progress, picking up 4 more podiums, and he was disqualified from another one in America post-race. Loic Serra, the performance director, would go on gardening leave prior to his move to Ferrari and was replaced by David Nelson for the development of the W15, their 2024 Challenger. This, though, wasn't the biggest news to come out of the Mercedes camp prior to the 2024 season. On the 1st of February 2024, it was announced that Lewis Hamilton would leave the team at the end of the 2024 season after 2 years of stagnation in search for his 8th title. And who would blame him? He's 30, he'll be 40 when he links up with Scuderia Ferrari for 2025 and his hopes are slipping away. And the Mercedes team have been unable to give him a race-winning car for 45 races now. The mood within the camp was positive and the car was more predictable and easy to drive than the year before, but the start of the season was the worst of the 3 years. No podiums for 8 races. The first double DNF for 6 years for Mercedes in Australia. It was crisis time. Upgrades came in Imola with a revised floor brake ducts, rear and beam wings, which saw an improvement in performance starting from Canada, where George and Verstappen took identical pole position times when Hamilton was just 2/10 off. In the race, Russell would take 3rd with Lewis Hamilton angry in 4th, feeling as though he should have taken more advantage of the car. The start of the European season would be good as Hamilton would take provisional pole in Q1 and would start on Sunday 3rd with Russell 4th. Legitimately, the fastest the car had been since the tail end of 2022. But they were still not fast enough to catch the cars in front. Verstappen and Lando Norris would break away and finish 15 seconds ahead of Hamilton in third, with Russell fourth in a reverse result of Canada. Austria would see Russell running in third on lap 64 with Lewis sixth. When the two in front of Russell, Norris and Verstappen would come together, ending Norris's race and Verstappen's race charge and leaving George in the lead. And he would come home to win. The pace of the Mercedes was finally enough to win a race. Even though it was lucky, he was there, which is something the upgrades allowed them to be. Austria was the 56th race of Lewis Hamilton's win drought, but it was one of the most promising ones. He finished fourth, but the Mercedes being on pace mid-season was very promising for the team, and it was the first time they could really claim that since 2021. The next race was to be the home race for both Hamilton and Russell, the British Grand Prix, one Hamilton had won 8 times. As such, Mercedes had traditionally gone well here, and as such, much was expected. Q1 would kick off proceedings with Hamilton going fastest by 6 tenths to Russell and almost an entire second back to third place Charles Leclerc. Q2 would see Hamilton drop to 5th, Lando took provisional pole, but Q3 would be where it mattered. George Russell would take provisional pole after the first runs, with Norris second and Hamilton third, but the times were incredibly close and one more lap would be needed in order to seal pole position. Nico Hülkenberg would be first across the line and into 6th. Verstappen was next, but he could only muster 5th behind the 2 Mercedes and the 2 McLarens. It would be between those 4 for pole. Norris ducked into the pits to end his session, and Hamilton would take provisional pole, which would be snatched away a couple of seconds later by George Russell, and so it was a Mercedes front row for the Sunday, the first since the 2022 Sao Paulo Grand Prix, and by now, I'd hope we all know what happened. The 2 Mercedes led away at the start, but with McLaren more set up for the wetter conditions, they edged forward and into the lead as the track became damper. Intermediates became the tyre to be on, and Oscar Piastri missed the mark, dropping him out of contention. George Russell would retire on lap 33, meaning that all of Mercedes' efforts backed on just one man. On lap 39, Hamilton and Verstappen would once again come in for slick tyres, with Hamilton opting for the softs to build up a gap and Verstappen for the hard so he would be quicker at the end. Norris, just like Piastri earlier, had pit stop issues which saw him lose a couple of seconds and lose the lead again to Hamilton. From there, the McLaren dropped off and Verstappen came back into play, but he just ran out of time. Lewis Hamilton was a Grand Prix winner once again. For nearly 3 years, Hamilton, one of the greatest drivers in Formula 1 history, faced an unprecedented dry spell. A lot of people began to wonder if he would ever get back to the top step of the podium. Think about the emotional and mental resilience required to endure that long without a win, yet he never gave up. He kept pushing, kept fighting, showing us all what true champions are made of. In Silverstone, a track steeped in history and significance for British motorsport, especially for Hamilton himself, who became the first man to win 9 races at the same track. It couldn't have been a more perfect stage for this monumental comeback. The crowd was electric, the atmosphere was palpable, and when Hamilton crossed that finish line, it was as if the entire nation was cheering with him. This victory is more than just a win, it's a testament to Hamilton's perseverance, his unwavering determination, and his ability to rise to the occasion when it matters the most. It reminds us why we fell in love with this sport in the first place, the drama, the passion, and the sheer brilliance of seeing a driver conquer the odds. If this race has taught us anything, it's to never count out a champion.